Hey everybody, it is Jordan from Wednesday Night Warhammer. We're back again, but this time I'm talking about my favorite squiggly guys, the Vanguard Onslaught. I've talked about them before, but a lot has changed, and I'm excited to tell you why I think that the Vanguard Onslaught detachment is once again a very strong and powerful detachment. All right, so the detachment overview, basically our army rule is all units can fall back in charge. Then, in addition, if units have the Vanguard Invader keyword, they can advance in charge, which gives a lot of movement buff to basically everything, makes your army so much faster and able to get to places it normally wouldn't. And then the Vanguard Invader units included, you can see, look at that list. There are so many of them. And there are actually quite a bit that were added that are very important in the most recent balance data slate. So, what exactly has changed in order to bring this detachment, I think, up to the forefront of competitive Tyranid play is first off, the Trigon, Mawloc, and Raveners have all gained the Vanguard Invader keyword. So, first up, that means they can all advance in charge now, which is very, very, very good, of course. And then they also get access to some very key stratagems that allow them to work in a way that is very competitive. Most importantly, I think surprise assault and then invisible hunters, I believe the yoink strat to bring the Mawlocs and the Trigons back into strategic reserves, which is very powerful. Then synapse buff on the Broodlord gaining synapse, and also the buff to strength when any unit is within synapse allows for the Genestealers to reach a very important breaking point of strength 5 as opposed to strength 4, as well as getting the Broodlord up to strength 6, which we'll talk about later on in this video. I think that is very, very strong. And then all of a sudden you have 30 Genestealers who used to be hitting on strength 4 instead of strength 5. It basically gives your army +1 to wound all the way around into a lot of matchups. And then what I thought was originally going to be a nerf, I think has ended up being a very strong buff, is the changes to the free strat, especially with Hive Tyrants. We can do it twice in a battle round, once on your turn and once on your opponent's turn. And now we can do it on any stratagem, especially with the FAQ that said that we can target things like surprise assault. This is very, very strong. It allows for the Winged Hive Tyrant in particular to make really good use of all of our stratagems that are very powerful within the Vanguard Onslaught. So our first set of stratagems that we have access to in this detachment are all very powerful, I think. The first one we got is Surprise Assault. Pick any invader unit and an enemy unit. Enemy unit takes Battle Shock test. You automatically get +1 to hit, and if they fail that Battle Shock check, you get +1 to wound. This is a very strong stratagem, and we'll talk about it a little bit later because it also plays off of the Neurolictor too, and it allows more units than just the one unit that you selected to gain buff from that Battle Shock debuff. So that's a very key play in this detachment. Next is Assassin Beast. Vanguard Invader unit gains precision on melee weapons. Pretty straightforward. I think this stratagem is okay. It's not the best, but I do see it coming into play if you want to be able to just take out a key unit without getting through the bodyguard. Maybe like Gazgul or, Abaddon could be a good target for this. Seated Bruise allows for reserves to come into play as if it was a turn earlier on your turn specifically. So that means you could deep strike your Mawloc turn 1. Be pretty cool. You can bring in your Raveners or maybe Gargoyles if you're playing with them turn 1 for some mission play or for some surprise attack. Or if you're feeling very spicy in Vanguard Onslaught, bring in those Zoanthropes turn 1. You know what I'm saying? All right, our last 3 stratagems that we have here are kind of some shenanigan, some trickery stratagems that I really like. The first one is Hypersensory Cilia. And this is basically if your opponent moves a unit within 9 inches of 1 to 2 of your units, you can make a normal move of 6 inches away from them or closer if you'd like. You can do it with 1 unit if they're not Vanguard Invader, and then 2 units if they are Vanguard Invader. This is you can use this in coordination with maybe Unseen Lurkers, which we'll talk about in a second, to maybe give Lone Op to your Lictors or something. Could be very powerful, or to just keep them out of line of sight. Very interesting. Next up, we have Invisible Hunters. Talked about very briefly before with the Mawloc is at the end of your opponent's fight phase, put one infantry unit into reserve or 2 units if they are in Vanguard Invader units. And I double checked and I reread this twice. It says 2 Vanguard Invader units. It doesn't say 2 Vanguard Invader infantry units, which is very, very key. And we'll talk about it in a second why that stratagem is so powerful, especially now with the changes in the balanced data slate to this detachment. And then last but absolutely not least is the Unseen Lurkers. It gives lone op to a Vanguard Invader unit, 18 inches now, of course, because of the new rules with lone op stratagems. And then if that unit already has lone op, they cannot be targeted outside of 6 inches. And that's just 1 CP. So this is really strong for your lictors or your neurolictors or death leaper, because it really provides that extra layer of cushion and honestly extra layer of annoyance with your opponents. They really have to get into your face if they're going to activate into some of your key units or just units standing by themselves holding objectives. For our enhancements, this detachment also has some really strong enhancements. First up, we got the hunting grounds. After an enemy unit enters the battlefield, they must take a battle shock test on a 2-up. So anytime, like from deep strike, strategic reserve, some redeploys or whatever, not before the game redeploys, but they will always trigger a battle shock test. And with certain armies, like if you're talking about Grey Knights, and they're going to be uppy downing a bunch, you can only roll a 6-up so many times, and then all of a sudden you're battle shocked, and that could definitely hamper, whatever your opponent is trying to do. If they're trying to score engage on all fronts, or if they're trying to do, I forget the new deploy teleport homers. If they're trying to do that, then all of a sudden they can deep strike into your backline, but then they can't do it because they're battle shocked, and then they're just kind of high and dry, just sitting there looking at themselves. So I definitely think Hunting Grounds is a very valuable pick in your list if you're able to fit it. Then we have Chameleonic, Vanguard Invader unit only. Model gains stealth, and then the unit has cover as well. So it's kind of interesting, the wording where that model in particular gets stealth and the whole unit gets cover. Kind of interesting. I find myself just slamming this on a Winged Hive Tyrant just to give that a extra layer of durability. -1 to hit all the time is very strong. It just allows your Hive Tyrant to survive a little bit longer. And then the cover, I think, comes up a little bit less often because so many things can avoid cover, but it is definitely that added little cushion if you're able to capitalize off of it. The Neuro Node. Now, the Neuro Node definitely changed with the new rules as well. You can no longer redeploy 3 Vanguard Invader units after the first turn is determined. You do this now before, like any redeploy in the game, which I kind of like that was a game change that GW decided, but I still think that this is worth it if you have 20 points, because you can do things like string out your Von Ryan's Leapers, really screen out the no man's land area so that your Genestealers can scout with impunity. They can go wherever they want before the game, and kind of box your opponent in even during the deployment phase of the game. And then if you don't like the way deployment looks, then you can yoink your Von Ryan's Leapers back into a safer position. You can change where your Genestealers are going to scout. And I definitely still think it is powerful. You just kind of have to figure and have a game plan using it before you even approach the table. It's not something that is just easy mode. Oh, I'm just going to yoink things back now because I know I'm going first. You kind of have to be a little bit smart and clever about Neuronode. Stalker, Vanguard Invader unit. Start of the game, select 1 enemy unit, add 1 to hit and wound against that unit. It's 10 points. It's rather cheap. I think it's okay. I'm not really super excited, and I'm not going out of my way to include this in my list, but if I have the extra 10 points, it could be useful on a Brood Lord or maybe a Hive Tyrant. It's all right, but I don't think you're going to cry and run home if you're not able to fit the Stalker enhancement. All right, so our key units now with the resurgence of this detachment. Some of them are the same. Some of them, have been shifted around a little bit. First up, we got the Neurolictor. Provides a huge damage buff. Now you're going to be able to trigger battle shocks, of course, in your own command phase. But you're also going to be able to gain benefits of units that fail from the surprise assault stratagem. So that could be really good in helping out any of our units to get +1 to wound. Because even though we get a bonus to strength within synapse, our strength is still pretty relatively low across the army. Strength 5 Genestealers is really cool now, but it's still only strength 5. So I think it's very important to have that +1 to wound. In addition, the Neurolictor has the lone op shenanigans. 12 inches is sometimes hard to commit to. And then when you have the threat of using a CP to make that 12 inches turn into 6 inches, that can be devastating for your opponent and really force them to commit in an area of the table that they necessarily don't want to. And then the last bullet point, I kind of already touched on that, layers buff with the surprise assault. So, you surprise assault something and then it's all of a sudden battle shocked, then anything that's around there, as long as the Neurolictor is in range, then can benefit from that +1 to wound. So it's very, very strong. The Winged Hive Tyrant. -1 attacks debuff in the combat phase can be just absolutely devastating, especially if they're going into Genestealers or something like that, and then you just -1 attack, and all of a sudden their chaff clearing unit goes from 3 attacks apiece to 2 attacks apiece or something. Can just be absolutely brutal because it can cut down the efficiency of a unit by like 33% in that case, or 25%, depending on how many attacks they have. It is very, very strong. Then the Winged Hive Tyrant with the stratagem changes, you're really allowed to do a lot of stratagem support in a way that I don't feel like you were able to do before, just because this detachment was so locked in on battle tactics before. But now you really get the opportunity to make use of that free stratagem or the CP reduction every single turn. Last but not least, it's kind of funny. I just said hits pretty hard. And now the Hive Tyrant's hitting on strength 10 with Twin Linked hitting on 2s. I really do think that they actually hit kind of hard. And it's just good to have a piece like that. Then at the bottom right there, we have the Lictor. It's lone op, kind of similar to the Neurolictor, and it's surprisingly strong. Strength 7, it very easily goes to strength 8 if you have synapse around it. So that can eat Marines for sure with its fights first and everything. Definitely is very efficient. And the last bullet point is kind of silly just putting it there, but he's 55 points. I think you're going to be hard pressed to find a unit as efficient or strong as a Lictor is for such a small price point. So he is definitely a very, very strong unit. And last but not least, the Genestealers. The clogged deployment zones, if you're able to scout out 8 inches and then advance and charge another 8 to 14 inches and then hit something, you can really keep your opponent where you want them to. Like I said right there, it's a 34-inch threat range turn 1. That is very, very spooky. They hit incredibly hard, especially now with the strength 5, like I've said before. Rerolling 1s to hit and then rerolling 1s to wound if they're on objective with those devastating wounds and everything. Really pack a punch. And, I've always said that people don't commit enough into Genestealers. 2 wounds apiece with a 5-up invuln and -1 to hit in combat off of the Broodlord. And if you're able to stack that like with the Winged Hive Tyrant debuff, the Genestealers are a menace, especially to melee armies, if you are able to stack all of those buffs. All right, I just wanted to take a second to really dial in on why Surprise Assault, the stratagem itself, can be such a strong combo with this army that wants to be triggering battle shocks all the time. So first up with the Winged Hive Tyrant, it's an easy battle shock trigger. It can be done in both turns because it does not specify when your unit is activating. It just says before a Vanguard Invader unit has shot or fought in those phases. So you could do it with one unit and then not even say, I'm going to fight there first. You can do it with your Raveners first. And then if it does go off, you do get the +1 to wound and you really want to activate there first, you can do that there. But if you don't and you want to move to a different unit on the battlefield first, you are still able to do that. And with the Hive Tyrant being able to do it for free, it's free. So if if they don't fail their battle shock check, then it's not really that much resources spent into a broken combo or a combo that doesn't come to fruition. Then talking about the Raveners, going from hitting on threes to hitting on twos is a very, very strong buff, especially when you think about it, all of their weapons are twin linked. So twin linked with a possible +1 to wound is incredibly reliable because you're re-rolling all of those hits, and then hopefully you get that 16% bonus to a wounding. So it definitely adds up that all the dice manipulation with the re-rolls and the plus to hit can make the Raveners such a blender unit. And then last but not least, we've talked about this before in the video, is the Neurolictor. It further buffs surrounding squads that the strat wasn't used on. So, for example, if I say I want my Raveners to gain the benefit of +1 to hit, right? So I'm going to use Surprise Assault with them, so they hit on twos, right? Then that unit fails their battle shock, okay? So the Raveners get +1 to hit, of course, but then if I have Genestealers or something else that is also going into that unit, then I am able to benefit not just off of the Raveners, but also off of everything else that is within engagement range of that, because the Neurolictor's around, giving that +1 to wound. So if you are able to position your units in a very specific way, then you can definitely benefit off of the Neurolictor's buff with like 3 or 4 units using the Surprise Assault stratagem. And then last but certainly not least, it's going to debuff that unit even more by giving it -1 to hit. So not only is it getting hit so much harder by all of these units, it is also getting a nasty debuff in combat. All right, here's the spice that everybody is very excited about. It's the Mawloc now. Now that the Mawloc is able to gain benefits from specifically the Invisible Hunters strat, it has definitely become a very interesting piece in the Vanguard Onslaught detachment. Now, so here's the combo, if you're not familiar with it. So the Mawloc is going to deal mortals if it comes up from strategic reserves or deep strike within 12 inches of a unit. Okay, so you deep strike it within 12 inches as many units as possible that your opponent has. And then for each enemy unit within 12, roll a dice. On a 2 to 4, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. On a 5 to 6, they suffer flat 3 and must take a battle shock test. Now, if you're rolling 5s and 6s a lot, that can be a very, very, very good buff for our detachment. If you'll notice, pretty much all the combos, all the things I've been talking about has been kind of maybe orbiting around battle shock checks. If you're able to have your opponent continuously take these battle shock checks, it can be very annoying and frustrating for them to hold points, and a very strong possibility of you able to get that +1 to wound buff from your Neurolictor, which is very strong. And then the last bit of the combo is the end of your opponent's turn. You spend 1 CP, you can Invisible Hunters your Mawloc away, and then rinse and repeat. Something with this combo, I strongly recommend doing 2 Mawlocs and not just 1 Mawloc on its own, because of the damage output, and we'll talk about this in a second, is dependent on a dice roll. I think you want as many Mawloc triggers as possible. So you're definitely going to be running to run 2 instead of just 1. And then that also gains the benefit of Invisible Hunters, because you can scoop both of your Mawlocs away at the end of your opponent's turn, and then they can just come back again on your turn again, and then do the same battle shock, do the same mortal wound trigger to as many units as possible. If you're able to do this and really protect your Mawlocs, it could be nasty with all those mortal wounds and clearing out your opponent's units. It could be a pretty strong combo for sure. But now we're here. I know, and I know I just said that the Mawloc combo is very strong. However, I do want to point some criticisms into the combo and kind of explain why maybe I'm not running double Mawlocs right now, even though it is very cool and very fun. So the problem is, and I've given a neat little circle over here, the area of effect is actually smaller than you'd think. Yes, 12 inches is a pretty big area that you can go. And yes, with having two Mawlocs, you can overlap and give double triggers and have, more and more units happen from this. But however, they're already screened out with 9 inches because there's no way for you to give your Mawloc a deep strike within 6 or 3 or whatever. So if they're screened out 9 inches, then, if you think about the white circle as 9 inches right there that I've put over there, and then the red circle ring around it, that is the 3-inch ring around it. So it's actually not that much of an area that you can affect because you are already being screened out by 9 inches. If your opponent, it's one of these combos where the more skilled your opponent is, the less likely you're able to capitalize on it. If your opponent just runs out units, right, and their screen units, they just run them out, and then they have their important units maybe 3.1 inches behind those units, then they can very easily protect the units that they don't want to get Mawloc bombed. Don't let anybody know about that, or else our Mawlocs are definitely going to be less lethal. But I think the trick is you just run out screen units, and then any important units that you have that you don't want to get mortal wounded, you just have them 3.1 inches behind those units. So then that can definitely put a damper on the 12-inch bubble, because of course 3.1 outside of 9, that's going to be greater than 12 inches and won't be affected by the Mawloc bomb. The second bullet point, I know we are playing a dice game, but still the whole shenanigans on the Mawloc can be, if you roll 3 ones in a row and you're only affecting 3 units, then there you go. That's your Mawloc trigger for the turn. And it's very sad. I think definitely the reason why we want to play the Mawlocs is because of the flat 3 mortal wounds and the battle shock check on a 5 and 6. I can roll 5s pretty good, but I'm not going to roll 5s and 6s every single time. If I knew for certain that I was going to roll a 5 or 6 every single time, I would absolutely be slamming Mawlocs into my list. However, the chance of that is not super, super great. So I'm not always super excited about 2 Mawlocs. And then addition, yes, if you get your 5 or 6, you get the flat 3 mortal wounds. But what you're really wanting is that battle shock for +1 to wound. Then they get an opportunity to roll dice and then maybe succeed their battle shock. So it's too many barriers of entry for a bonus that might happen. Next up, it's relatively fragile. Yes, they're monsters with T10 and then 14 wounds, I believe, but I feel like the game is very killy. Your Mawloc comes in, it's not going to charge because you want to hide it. It deals maybe 6 mortal wounds. That's pretty good. But then if your opponent is then able to move up and then just charge your Mawloc, then it can be kind of not a really good trade for you because you've lost this very important piece. And then 290 points for 2 Mawlocs. That is pricey off of something that your opponent could just make all of their battle shocks. Or maybe you flub all of your Mawloc deep strike rolls. It definitely... The risk reward is tough there. It could be very cool, or it could maybe not go the way that you would want. It definitely does eat away at your CP. If you're doing something like Seated Broods, where you bring in your Mawloc turn 1 or something, or if you rapid ingress your Mawloc for a CP, then it can definitely start to eat away at your resources. And this detachment is very CP heavy. All of the combos kind of revolve around important stratagems. And if you're going the Mawloc plan, then some of your other units are going to suffer a little bit just because you're not able to capitalize on all of your CP because you're spending it all on your Mawlocs. Which is very fun and cool, but it might hamper your gameplay more than continue it. And then last but not least, I just want to throw a comparison. It's the same price as 6-man Zoanthrope and a Gargoyle Squad. I don't know. I know I'm a huge Zoanthrope stan. I really love Zoanthropes. I know not everybody agrees, but it's just a small comparison. I'm not saying all Vanguard Onslaught lists should be running Zoanthropes, but if you look at that, in my opinion, I would probably want the Zoanthropes more than the 2 Mawlocs. But that's just me, I'd love to hear what you think about in the comments, but obviously if you want to run Mawlocs, don't who cares what people on the internet are saying? Run Molochs, man. They're super cool. But I definitely think it is a discussion to have where are they really as good and cool as we were making them out to be when we initially saw this change? Okay. Why are people running so many Genestealers? I think Vanguard Onslaught lists, a lot of them were maybe doing one or two units of 10 before, and now I feel like a lot of people are just windmill slamming 3 units and you just running 30 Genestealers and 3 Broodlords. That's how you start your list. It's because strength 5. It's because strength 5, Broodlord giving strength 5 to all your Genestealers is a huge buff. Winning Marines on 3s, Marine equivalent units. I bet you, you know, 8-9 times out of 10, if you're going to an RTT or a GT or basically any event, you are probably going to run into some kind of list that has some kind of power armor unit, or it's T4 with a 3-up save. And Genestealers just do really well into those units. So I definitely think that that is a good approach to have, strength 5. In addition, you're winning orcs and other T5 units, models, and armies on 4s. I think that is something that is very important to highlight. I know orcs aren't as prevalent into the meta, but any unit that is equivalent or similar to an orc, you definitely gain that bonus from. Then, because we're on 5s instead of 4s, and a little bit of math, strength 4 times 2 is 8. Strength 5 times 2 is 10. So you get that little breaking point with toughness 8 and 9. Now you are wounding on 5s instead of 6s, which is actually a very, very huge buff because it's basically 16% bonus to wound across the board. Being able to pop lightly armored transports is sometimes a hard thing to do for Tyranids. So having Genestealers that are now being able to wound on 5s instead of 6s definitely helps us in that part of our mission. And then last but not least, I know I've talked about just Genestealers. But that's all of the buffs that we get with the Genestealers without even considering the Broodlord. When you consider the Broodlord on strength 6 now wounds sisters and elves on 2s all over the place, and wounds everything up to 11 on 5s at the worst. And then with that twin link, it really comes into play and it really helps out and makes this unit a blender unit to a lot of what it will go up against. So bring your Genestealers, guys. 30 of them, please. All right, and we are coming close to our video, and this is normally the time where I would show you one of the lists that I've been playing and I've had a lot of fun with. But, I thought it would be even better to share a list that did very well at LSO. This is Nathaniel Bjorg. I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, but congrats, dude. This list is incredible. It went undefeated and got 3rd place at LSO, and I think at least is in aligned with some of the thoughts that I had in this video and how to play this detachment. It's triple Broodlord, Death Leaper, Neuro Tyrant with the Neuro node still redeploying, Wing type Tyrant with Chameleonic. It's very sneaky, very durable, and then the Winged Tyranid Prime. And then if you look at the other data sheets, triple Genestealers, double Lictor, double Neuro Lictor, 12 Raveners. Now this is interesting. He used the gun instead of the armored thorax. I've been using the armored thorax a lot, but I think I'll give it a go with the gun since he had so much success with it. And then a big 6-man brick of the Tyranid Warriors, and then 3 Von Ryan Sleepers. I love this list. This list is incredible. This list says, I don't care about my deployment zone too much. I'm just going to run at you and then take over the field. And what are you going to do after that? And it's very fun. You just throwing a units at your opponent, stepping on the gas where you need to, being careful, when you need to as well. But it's a whole lot of fun. And then, of course, Nathaniel, you did an incredible job and just killed it at LSO. So great job with your success. And you can actually see him play with this list on Wargames Live. I think it was day 2 that he played up against Grey Knights. So take a look at that if you want. If you want to see really a master of this detachment play it, I would highly recommend watching that video. Also because Wargames Live is a great stream, and I love watching that stream as well. But yeah, take a look at this list. I love it. It's a little bit different from what my playstyle will be or is, but I'm not saying that anything that I run that's different is going to be better than this. But I definitely think this is a very cool list, and I think you should try it out. if you have the units. All right, everybody. Once again, thank you so much for hanging out. Listen to me ramble for a little bit about some of my favorite bugs. Uh, as always, let me know if you agree. Let me know if you disagree. Come watch us every Wednesday. I'm actually playing Vanguard Onslaught this Wednesday. Check out that video. It'll be great. We always have a good time, and we'd love to have you there. All right. Take it easy. Bye.